To think deeply is to suffer deeply. You walk into a quiet cafe. In the corner, someone is hunched over a book no one else would ever choose to read. Their eyes dart across the pages with intensity, but it's not passion. It's a desperate search, not for answers, but for something even rarer: relief. Relief from the constant ache of thinking too much. They understand the world more than most, but somehow they belong to it less. This is the paradox that haunts the brilliant. The smarter you are, the heavier reality feels. You see patterns others are blind to. You recognize hypocrisies in society, contradictions in relationships, and lies people tell themselves just to survive the day. Your mind is a scalpel cutting through illusion like butter. But what happens when that scalpel turns inward? What happens when your own thoughts become too sharp to touch? You try to mute it, maybe with distractions, maybe with cynicism, maybe with substances. But it doesn't go away. The engine keeps running, a relentless machine chewing through meaning, deconstructing comfort, unraveling joy. You can't not see the absurdity of it all. The rat race, the performative friendships, the shallow conversations, the soul-numbing rituals we call success. And then, the silence. Not peace, emptiness. You ask yourself, why am I like this? Why can't I just be happy like everyone else? Is there something wrong with me? Or something wrong with the world? And here's the terrifying thought. What if it's both? What if intelligence, true, penetrating, untamed intelligence, isn't a gift, but a curse in disguise? What if the very thing that allows you to understand life is also what makes it unbearable? Because to be smart is not merely to know facts. To be smart is to see too much too clearly and too soon. You see through social masks, and now everyone feels fake. You see the impermanence of joy, and now nothing feels safe. You see the futility of ambition, and now nothing feels worth it. And yet, the world keeps spinning. The crowds still cheer. The shallow still smile. While you sit there thinking, watching, drowning in an ocean no one else even notices. So you pretend. You act normal. You laugh at jokes that don't make you feel anything. You nod in conversations that mean nothing. You work hard at things that hollow you out. Because what else can you do in a world where depth is a liability? Here's the bitter irony. You're praised for your intelligence, but punished for your sensitivity. You're admired for your insight, but isolated for your authenticity. You're told you're lucky to be gifted, but it feels more like being haunted. And the worst part, no one suspects a thing. The world assumes the smart ones have it figured out. But what if the smart ones are the most lost of all? What if depression isn't the failure of the intelligent mind, but its most natural consequence? If you've ever felt this, the ache of knowing, the exhaustion of thinking, the burden of feeling too much, you are not alone. There is a hidden cost to awareness, a psychological tax on the soul for seeing the world without filters. It's not about IQ. It's not about school or success. It's about the quiet war that plays out inside the minds of those who see beyond the veil and wish they didn't. So ask yourself, is your sadness a flaw or a form of intelligence? Is your despair a disease or a deeper kind of perception? And if so, what is it that only the depressed know about this world? Maybe the question isn't why are smart people often depressed? Maybe the real question is, how could they not be? And yet the story doesn't end here. Because understanding the darkness is only the first step. The real journey begins when you stop asking why it hurts and start asking what it means. Let's go deeper. What if your depression isn't a malfunction, but a message, a quiet rebellion of the soul? A scream that was never spoken, buried beneath layers of logic and expectations. You were taught to believe that intelligence is the solution to suffering, that if you're smart enough, you can think your way out of anything. But what if that belief is the beginning of the trap? You see, intelligence, raw, unfiltered intelligence, is like a spotlight. It shines on everything. but it does not discriminate. It reveals beauty, yes. Truth, yes. But it also exposes cruelty, absurdity, contradiction, and the sheer fragility of existence. The smarter you are, the more you're exposed to the underlying chaos of reality. You start to notice that most people's lives are carefully curated distractions, jobs that mean nothing, relationships that lack depth, goals that collapse upon attainment. And you can't look away. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." But the intelligent don't get that luxury. They are the ones forced to face the soul, whether they want to or not. Because intelligence brings with it not just insight, but awareness. Awareness of suffering, both personal and collective. Awareness of mortality. Awareness of the cosmic indifference of the universe. It's not sadness that defines this condition. It's the inability to unsee. You don't just experience life. You analyze it constantly. You don't just suffer. You watch yourself suffering, wondering why, diagnosing every emotion, dissecting every failure, intellectualizing every ache. This hyper-awareness, what psychologists sometimes call rumination, is like being trapped in a hall of mirrors. And there is no exit, but the roots run even deeper. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this torment well. He spoke of the man who stares into the abyss only to discover that the abyss stares back. To be intelligent is to confront the abyss and keep looking, not because you want to, because you can't stop. But what lies in that abyss at its core, a crisis of meaning. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that life at its foundation is suffering, not in a pessimistic way, but in a brutally honest one. He argued that the more aware a person is, the more clearly they see the emptiness of worldly striving, that our desires never end, and our satisfaction is always temporary. To the intelligent, this isn't theory, it's felt, a gnawing emptiness that success cannot fill, a hunger for something real in a world obsessed with the artificial. And here's the second layer of the trap. When you see the emptiness of things but still live in a society that worships them, you begin to detach, not out of arrogance, but out of survival. You start to withdraw from the noise, from the shallow, from the crowds who seem blissfully unaware of the game being played. And slowly isolation sets in. Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist, once said, "If you're lonely when you're alone, you're in bad company." But what if the loneliness comes not from being alone, but from being unable to connect in a world that feels fundamentally foreign to you? You try to reach out, but the words feel hollow. You smile, but it feels like a lie. You pretend, but inside you know you're wearing a mask to survive a party you never wanted to attend. And in this space between seeing everything and feeling nothing, you begin to fall. Not dramatically, but gradually. A slow erosion of spirit. Because depression doesn't always come with tears or drama. Sometimes it arrives as numbness, as silence, as a quiet disconnection from the things that once made you feel alive. But here's the cruel twist: society doesn't recognize this kind of suffering. If you're high functioning, if you smile, if you keep producing, no one asks if you're dying inside. And so you begin to wonder, is there something wrong with me? Or is this what it means to be awake in a world asleep? Viktor Frankl, Holocaust survivor and existential psychologist, once wrote, "When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. But if pleasure doesn't distract you, if you see through its illusions, what then? You're left raw, exposed, thinking, always thinking, and every insight feels like it comes at the cost of another piece of your innocence." So what is the hidden problem behind smart people and their depression? It's the collision between awareness and emptiness, between depth and disconnection, between the longing for meaning and a world that offers only content. You don't want more information. You want understanding. You don't crave stimulation. You crave significance. And until you find it, the mind keeps spiraling inward, searching, questioning, aching. Not because you are broken, but because you're still looking for what the world refuses to offer: truth, depth, and belonging. But here's the thing. This suffering, this exile of the soul, is not the end of the road. It's the beginning of a rebellion. You don't even notice it happening at first. You just start pulling back. One missed phone call, one skipped gathering. You sit at dinner tables, but drift somewhere else entirely, somewhere behind your eyes. Not out of rudeness, but because reality itself feels thin. This is how the silent unraveling begins. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself with sobs or screams. It's a slow erosion of interest, of energy, of trust in the world's promise that everything will be okay. But for those who think deeply, who live on the razor's edge of perception, everything is not okay. It's never been okay. And the more intelligent you are, the harder it becomes to pretend. What no one tells you is that the price of awareness isn't just loneliness. It's alienation, not just from others, but from yourself. You start to doubt your own reactions. Why do I feel this way? Everyone else seems fine. You begin to distrust your sensitivity, your depth, your sorrow. And in a culture obsessed with happiness as the ultimate currency, being thoughtful becomes a kind of sin. Optimism is rewarded. Complexity is pathologized. You're told to lighten up, stay positive, be grateful. But how do you tell someone that your mind is a war zone, not because of what's wrong with you, but because you can see what's wrong with everything? This is one of the most dangerous consequences of being a deeply intelligent person in a shallow world. You begin to gaslight your own soul, because no one else seems to feel it. No one else seems to be asking the questions you ask. And slowly you begin to wonder, maybe I'm the problem. But you're not. The problem is that you see too much and society punishes depth. Modern culture is not designed for thinkers. It is designed for consumers. It rewards compliance, not contemplation, speed, not stillness, performance, not presence, scroll, buy, achieve, smile, repeat. If you hesitate, if you dare to pause and ask, why am I even doing this? You're labeled as unmotivated, depressed, or broken. But what if your hesitation is the most human thing about you? What if pausing to reflect, to mourn, to question isn't weakness, but a kind of grace? Still, the world won't wait for you to figure that out. So you learn to wear a mask, you perform wellness, you laugh on cue, you build a persona the world can tolerate. Meanwhile, your inner world begins to fracture. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, the tension that arises when your internal beliefs conflict with your external reality. But for smart people, that tension becomes a lifestyle. You're constantly editing yourself to fit into rooms that were never built to hold your truth. And it takes a toll. Physically, emotionally, spiritually. You start to feel disconnected from your own body. Sleep becomes elusive. Your nervous system hums like a low-grade alarm, always scanning, always tensing. It's as if your mind is trying to outrun something ancient, primal, and aching, and yet no one sees it, because the world only measures pain by how loud it is, and yours is silent. But that silence is deceptive. Beneath it is a storm, the storm of knowing how fragile it all is, knowing that most conversations are rehearsed, that most smiles are shields, that much of life is theater, and you were born without a script. Fyodor Dostoevsky once wrote, "Much unhappiness has come into the world because of bewilderment and things left unsaid." And that's what haunts you the most. The unsaid, the unfelt, the unlived. There's a kind of grief that comes with intelligence. A grief for the world as it could be but isn't. A grief for the depth you crave in people, depth they often don't know they've buried. A grief for the version of yourself that once believed things could be simple. And so you retreat. Not because you hate the world, but because you love it too much to bear its illusions. But isolation is a double-edged sword. What once felt like sanctuary slowly begins to feel like exile. And here lies the most tragic consequence of all. Smart people don't just feel misunderstood by others, they begin to misunderstand themselves. You start to wonder if your depth is a defect, if your sadness is proof that you've failed to adapt, if your inability to just be happy means there's something fundamentally wrong with you. You turn your brilliance inward, weaponizing it. You analyze your every flaw. You become your own critic, judge, and executioner. And all the while, the world cheers you on. Because you're still productive, still functional, still smiling. But inside, you're eroding. This is not a personal failure. This is what happens when a sensitive mind lives in an insensitive world. When the soul cries out for meaning and is answered with metrics. When the spirit longs for truth and is fed algorithms. When the heart seeks connection and finds only commentary. But you're not doomed to remain here, because in every exile there is a seed of return. In every collapse, the possibility of rebellion. There is a way out, but it requires a revolution of thought, a rejection of everything you were told was normal. You must become something the world doesn't expect whole, but to do that, you'll have to rebel. Not outwardly, inwardly. You don't escape a prison by decorating the walls. You escape by realizing you were never meant to be inside in the first place. And that is the beginning of your rebellion. But let's be clear, this isn't the kind of rebellion you've been sold. It's not about loud protests or radical detachment. It's not about shaving your head or quitting your job or screaming at the sky. This rebellion is quieter. It happens in the dark. It begins the moment you stop believing the lie that you are broken. Because you're not. You're not broken. You're awake. And that's a dangerous thing to be in a world that profits from people who are asleep. You see, the real war isn't outside. It's internal. The battle between the self you were trained to be and the self that aches to be known. This rebellion begins with remembering. Remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Before the masks, before the performance. Before your mind became a machine of self-doubt and distortion. That version of you, the raw questioning, deeply feeling one, never disappeared. It just got buried. So how do you start digging? You begin by confronting your shadow. Carl Jung called it the thing a person has no wish to be. It's everything you've repressed: your rage, your grief, your jealousy, your longing, your madness. It's the truth you've labeled as unacceptable. And smart people often bury it the deepest because they've been conditioned to be above those emotions. To stay rational, composed, in control. But depression thrives in the places we refuse to visit. And your shadow is not your enemy. It's your map. To break free, you must go there. You must feel the things you've numbed. Speak the truths you've silenced. Let yourself become real. This is not comfortable, but it's necessary. Because until you face your shadow, it will run your life from the dark. The next act of rebellion: stop performing wellness. This is crucial. You don't owe the world your composure. You don't have to smile when your soul is aching. You don't have to keep up with the pace of a world sprinting toward its own oblivion. Healing isn't linear. It's messy, non-linear, and deeply personal. Sometimes it looks like crying in the car. Sometimes it looks like saying no for the first time in years. Sometimes it's just getting out of bed and not hating yourself for it. Give yourself permission to be human. Because here's a truth that no one tells you. In a sick society, staying functional isn't a sign of health. It's a sign of adaptation. And what smart people often suffer from is not personal weakness, but a refusal to adapt to something insane. That's not failure. That's integrity. But to live with integrity, you have to unlearn what you were taught. You have to stop measuring your worth by productivity. You have to stop silencing your questions for the sake of fitting in. You have to stop apologizing for your depth. You have to reclaim your mind, because the mind of a thinking, feeling, sensitive person is a sacred thing. But when left unchecked, it becomes a tyrant. endlessly overanalyzing, endlessly catastrophizing, endlessly chasing perfection. So the rebellion isn't just about depth, it's also about discipline. You must train your mind to work with your soul, not against it. You do this by anchoring into presence, by grounding in the body, by practicing silence not as an escape, but as a return. You're not here to win the rat race, you're here to wake up. And awakening requires letting go of the stories you've inherited, of the roles you've been playing, of the toxic narratives that equate suffering with failure. You are allowed to be whole even in pain. You are allowed to be confused and still worthy. You are allowed to reject the cult of constant optimization. Because this rebellion isn't about becoming someone new. It's about unbecoming everything you were never meant to be. And when that happens, when the masks fall, something strange begins to take shape: freedom. Not the loud, flag-waving kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that comes from being able to sit with your sadness and not flinch. To walk through the world and no longer need to prove or explain yourself. To know that your pain is not a pathology, it's a passage. And then something even stranger happens. You begin to connect, not with everyone, but with those who have also walked through fire, who have stared into the abyss and returned with compassion instead of cynicism. These are your people, and they are few, but they are real, and in a world of illusions, that is everything. So what now? Now that the rebellion has begun, now that you've started peeling back the layers, where do you go from here? You go inward, yes, but not just to hide. You go inward to retrieve something you lost long ago, your essence. Because beneath all the overthinking, all the performing, all the despair is a truth so simple, so radiant, so alive, that when you finally touch it, it feels like coming home. But that truth isn't found in books or theories. It's not found in titles or diagnoses. It's found in stillness, in surrender, in the radical act of remembering who you are. And that leads us to the final door. Not just the end of the descent, but the beginning of awakening. Shall we step through it? What if your sadness was never the enemy? What if it was your last connection to something real in a world gone numb? This is the truth you were never meant to see. Your depression is not a malfunction. It is not a disease in the soul. It is a signal, a compass, a sacred message that you have been living a life unworthy of the depth within you. You were told that being smart was a gift, that if you just learned enough, mastered enough, succeeded enough, you'd be free. But no one warned you that with great intelligence often comes great sensitivity. And with great sensitivity comes a dangerous awareness of the absurdities around you. You see too much. You hear the hypocrisy in people's words. You feel the emptiness in small talk. You recognize the absurdity of chasing status in a collapsing world. You notice the quiet desperation in the eyes of those who pretend they have it all together. You notice, and it wears you down. But here's the final truth. The pain you carry isn't a burden. It's a mirror. It reflects the dissonance between who you are and who you've been pretending to be. Between what you know is meaningful and what you've been told to chase. The world has rewarded your intelligence, but punished your depth. It has applauded your achievements, but pathologized your despair. It has celebrated your intellect while ignoring your longing for something more. And that longing, that ache in your chest that no success can touch, it's not a flaw, it's your soul trying to wake you up. To what exactly? To the truth that this culture is upside down, that normal is not healthy, that endless productivity is not purpose, that numbing your pain is not healing, that suppressing your rage is not peace, that fitting in is not the same as being loved. This is the awakening, to realize that the very things that made you feel like an outsider were the evidence of your inner wholeness. The depression, the anxiety, the existential dread, these are not signs of weakness. They are signs that you're still alive in a world that teaches death in disguise. Death of the authentic self. death of curiosity, death of wonder, death of the sacred. But here's the miracle. You're still here, still questioning, still yearning. That means it's not too late. Not too late to reject the lie. Not too late to reorient your entire existence around what actually matters. Not too late to return to what was never broken. Because the final realization is this: you are not here to escape the world. You are here to transform within it. Not by overpowering it, but by choosing to be something utterly rare. A person who feels everything and still chooses to stay awake. A person who sees the madness and still chooses meaning. A person who suffers deeply and still chooses compassion. Because there is something stronger than despair, something wiser than intellect, something deeper than pain. Its presence, its authenticity, its love, not the romantic kind, the real kind, the kind that holds your grief without trying to fix it, the kind that listens to your silence, the kind that says, even this is worthy of love. And from that space you begin to see clearly that your intelligence was never the problem, that your depression was never your enemy. They were simply incomplete. They were waiting for something your culture never taught you: to develop soul. Because it is soul that gives meaning to intelligence. It is soul that gives direction to feeling. It is soul that carries you through the abyss and out the other side. And the soul does not speak in logic. It speaks in symbols, in silence, in suffering, and in beauty. It whispers through your tears. It echoes in your longing. It lives in the questions you were afraid to ask. What is this all for? Why am I really here? What would my life look like if I stopped pretending? Let yourself ask. Let yourself feel. Let yourself be real. Because the final act of rebellion isn't rage. It's presence. It's choosing to be fully alive in a world that numbs. It's showing up with your full self, unmasked, unedited, unashamed. That is the new definition of strength. Not detachment, not dominance, but the courage to be sensitive, awake, and deeply human. So here you are, on the other side of the descent. Not cured, but reclaimed. Not fixed, but aware. Not fearless, but free. And in that freedom, you now carry something far more powerful than answers. You carry the truth that you were never broken. The world just wasn't ready for your kind of mind, your kind of heart, your kind of seeing. But now you see, and now you choose. Not escape, but embodiment. Not despair, but awakening. Not silence, but truth. And in that choice, you become the very thing you were searching for all along. You become the light in the darkness. Not because you no longer suffer, but because you now understand the purpose of the pain. To awaken you, to bring you home, to remind you, you were always the answer. Fade to black. Silence. Then one final whisper. Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. Viktor Frankl.